Your elected representatives at the Statehouse aren't just working for you. Many of them have other jobs, too.
Indiana has a part-time legislature. The members don't do it as a full-time job. They've got other employment back home.
And Julia Vaughn with Common Cause Indiana says that can lead to some issues.
The problem with that is that conflicts of interest happen.
What kinds of conflicts? Vaughn points to a bill passed last year dealing with our state's wetlands, changing the permitting requirements for builders and developers. The bill's authors, Senators Chris Garton, Mark Messmer, and Linda Rogers, are all connected to the industry.
That was an issue where many of us said, hey, it just doesn't look right when the people pushing this major change in the law are going to benefit financially.
In a statement to the Star last year, Rogers says her experience in the building industry didn't play a role in her decision-making on the issue. It's far from the only example. State Senator Chip Perfect owns Perfect North Ski Slopes in southern Indiana, which employs hundreds of teenagers. In 2019, the senator proposed a measure to remove work permit and hours restrictions for 16 and 17-year-olds. State Rep Greg Porter is ranking Democratic member of the House Ways and Means Committee, which allocates funding in the state budget. And he's also a senior VP at the Health and Hospital Corporation of Marion County, which is currently taking a case to the Supreme Court that the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus wants them to drop. Porter's a member of that group and couldn't comment on the lawsuit because of his job with HHC. Even House Speaker Todd Houston found himself caught between his public and private roles. Last year, he had a six-figure job with the College Board, the national group that administers the SATs and advanced placement courses in high schools. In the midst of a curriculum debate last year, activists called on the College Board to fire Houston. Days later, he stepped down.
It was just the right time.
Houston's counterpart in the Senate, Rod Bray, told us recently he sees no issue with the way the legislature operates.
The value and the importance of being a part-time legislature. I'm a big proponent of that and will continue to be. People bring their expertise and their knowledge here and help craft good legislation.
And with or without controversy, other lawmakers are also publicly visible in multiple roles. Like Mitch Gore, a state lawmaker representing the southeast side of Indy.
That can make a huge impact.
Here he is at a press conference on gas prices earlier this year.
911 should be used.
And here he is in his other role as a Marion County Sheriff's deputy.
Some do a good job of self-regulating, others not so much.
So it's essentially up to the individual lawmaker.
It is.
We have an ethics committee so that if somebody is going to financially benefit from a law that they are authoring, sponsoring, or just going to be voting on, they take that in front of the ethics committee. But you're going to have some of those conflicts every year because people engage in this business, and when you're in the General Assembly, you deal with every facet of Indiana's business, and so some of those conflicts are just going to come up.
The tendency is to hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil.
Vaughn points to recent controversies like the one involving former state rep Eric Turner, who faced scrutiny for his connections to the nursing home industry. Now she wants tougher standards at the Statehouse and an ethics commission that includes regular citizens.
Campaign finance records.
Bill Moreau founded a group called the Indiana Citizen to try and give you more information about your government.
We think it starts with having the information readily accessible to voters.
On their website, you can find info about your elected officials at the Statehouse and their professional backgrounds.
Voters should know what's motivating their state representative or senator to vote in a certain way.
Porter's office sent us a statement saying, in part, Representative Porter has and continues to abide by and practice the recusal process, as do many of his Indiana General Assembly colleagues. More statements as they come in on our website at fox59.com.
Former Vice President Mike Pence walked into our studios with a lot to say about the events of the last few years, including the attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
The president's statements that day, in the midst of the riot.
Some of them about you specifically.
I thought they were reckless. His words that day endangered my family, endangered other people.
Why wait this long to say all of this publicly and to this extent about that day and how you felt everything went down in terms of the president's actions specifically?
Well, of course, I spoke about January 6th on January 6th when we reconvened the Congress. I condemned the violence. I praised the heroes. I made it clear publicly that President Trump was wrong. But in my book, So Help Me God, I wanted people to understand not just what I did that day, but how and why I did it.
But we also asked, what will he do next? Will he really run against former President Trump in the primary?
For President of the United States.
What would that primary be like, given everything that's transpired since the 6th of January last year?
Well, Karen and I are going to give serious consideration to running for president in 2024. But we're going to approach it the same way we've approached every decision since I was first elected to Congress in 2000. That is, we'll bring our family together, we'll take time to pray, we'll take time to talk, we'll hear from trusted friends, and try and listen to the American people in ways to discern whether or not we have a calling.
And as the VP was leaving, he told me that's a decision that could come sometime after the holidays.
We literally haven't had our whole family together in 3 years, and so this Christmas all by itself is going to be special. Our granddaughter will be with us with 2 more on the way, but we're also going to take time, Dan, as I've said, to reflect. We're going to take some time to talk about the future. Karen and I will also be talking with friends, and we'll give prayerful consideration to where we might next serve. And sometime after the first of the year, we'll make a decision about what's next for Mike and Karen Pence.
All right, much more from my interview Sunday morning at 9:30 on this week's edition of In Focus. Former Vice President Pence's new book, So Help Me God, had many revelations about his relationship with former President Trump, as you heard there at the start of our interview. But we also spoke with him about several other topics, including civility and the results of this year's midterms. Here's more of our interview now with the former VP.
Dan, when I look at the 2022 midterm elections, there's one common denominator, and that is that Republican candidates that were focused on the future. They were focused on the challenges that are facing the American people, a high cost of living, high gasoline prices, a crisis at our border, crime in our streets. Candidates focused on the future did very well. But conversely, candidates that were focused on the past, particularly those that were seeking to relitigate the last election, did not fare as well. So I think the first object of the new Republican majority in the Congress is to step forward and articulate a vision for the future, solutions that are grounded in the policies that we proved work to make America stronger and more secure during the Trump-Pence administration. I really do believe that the American people are looking for leadership that can unite us around our highest ideals and demonstrate the kind of respect and civility for one another that the American people show every day.
But sadly, in these divided times, we've also seen political violence along the lines of what we saw on January 6th, but we've also seen violence directed at specific groups of people, whether that be anti-Semitic violence or the shooting at the AME church in South Carolina or the shooting this past weekend that targeted members of the LGBT community in Colorado. How much blame belongs to the political discourse in this country for inspiring some of these hateful attacks?
I think we want to be very careful about associating acts of mindless violence like what took place in Colorado Springs in the LGBT community to the public debate. I mean that.
But other elements of that public debate, that discourse that inspire people who aren't.
I remember the congressional baseball game I write about in So Help Me God. My dear friend Steve Scalise was almost killed by a gunman who was a supporter of Bernie Sanders and inspired by his political rhetoric. Look, we've got to protect freedom of speech in this country, but I do believe that a side benefit of restoring more civility to public life would be strengthening the ties in our culture. But at the end of the day, we've got to continue to stand strong against anyone, left, right, or center, that would use violence to advance their views. It's utterly unacceptable, whether it was the 500 riots that took place in 2020, the riot at our nation's capital, or the unspeakable acts of violence that we witnessed again this week and that we witnessed at churches and schools over the years.
Well, and you wrote about Charlottesville in your book as well, and how discouraging that was. How do we move forward from events like that as a country?
I think we need leadership. I really do. and leadership that represents that we're all Americans. It recognizes, as I've learned in critical moments, that politics does fall away. And so help me God, I write about having been on Capitol Hill on September 11th and found myself as a freshman member of Congress swept up into the very office where the leadership of the Congress was gathered, Republicans and Democrats. I was there, Dan, when the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Congress said that there's an aircraft inbound to the Capitol and it's 12 minutes out. I write about looking out the window and looking at the Capitol dome and wondering if it was the last time that historic symbol of democracy would grace the skies of our nation's capital. But in that moment, after the danger had passed, I saw unity. And I write about it, and so help me God. I said, at that moment, there were no Republicans in the room, there were no Democrats in the room, there were just Americans. And people rolled their sleeves up, threw jackets over chairs, got out yellow pads, and started figuring out how we could work together to marshal the national response to respond to the worst terrorist attack in our nation in history. It's all still there. When it matters most, Americans come together.
What will the holidays be like for your family this year? You all chose to move back here to Indiana. Why was that important for you to be back here in the Hoosier State?
Well, it was the first decision Karen and I made when the election settled out, was that we didn't know what the future holds, but we figured we could see it better in Indiana. You know, Indiana's home. We literally haven't had our whole family together in 3 years, and so this Christmas all by itself is going to be special. Our granddaughter will be with us with 2 more on the way, and but we're also going to take time, Dan, as I've said, to reflect. My wife is my closest friend in the world, the love of my life, and our kids know their dad the best, and so we're going to take some time to talk about the future. Karen and I will also be talking with friends, and we'll give prayerful consideration to where we might next serve, and sometime after the first of the year, we'll make a decision about what's next for Mike and Karen Pence.
That's the timeline in the next calendar year?
I think so. I think it would have to be, and but as I said, we'll go where we're called. I've been traveling all over the country the last 2 years, and I know as challenging as these times are, that with right leadership, we can get this country turned around, and we can help bring this country together. And if we sense that we have a role to play in that, we'll do what we've always done, and that is step out in faith and trust the Lord and the American people for the rest.
Vice President Pence, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So this week we have an exclusive interview with another Hoosier who's been serving in the White House during the Biden administration. Chief of Staff Ron Klain, the Indianapolis native, is back home for the Thanksgiving holiday, and I spoke with him today one-on-one in a Fox 59 exclusive.
He has one of the busiest jobs in Washington.
The hours are long, the pressures are high.
But for White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, it all started here in Indianapolis.
Growing up here in Indiana taught me the value of hard work and humility.
The North Central grad says seeing Robert F. Kennedy come to Indy in 1968 sparked a passion for politics.
I was 6 years old. The Kennedy campaign was looking for a place to film a commercial, and they picked my dad's plumbing supply house, just kind of randomly.
He'd go on to serve with 2 vice presidents and led the Obama administration's response to the Ebola virus. Now he's at the president's side as the country emerges from the global pandemic and deals with the impact of soaring inflation.
A lot of people are still struggling to pay for gas and to pay for groceries this holiday season. What's the president's message right now for those who are struggling, whether they voted for his party or not in the midterms?
Well, look, I think it's the right question, Ann, because it doesn't really matter whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. We're all Americans, and we need to have a better economy. What the president's been working on, first of all, is bringing down the price of gasoline. It's come down a little more slowly here in Indiana than some other states, but all over the country, we're starting to see the price of gasoline come down.
Klain says he thinks the president will run for re-election, but he's not sure how long he'll serve as chief of staff. At nearly 2 years, he's already served longer than many have previously. In the meantime, this holiday weekend, he says it's nice to be back home, if only for a short while.
It's always great to be home. It's hard to get away, hard to get here. I've only been here a couple times over the past 2 years, but it's always great to be home in Indiana. I think Hoosiers are raised to work hard and not complain, and to take on their responsibilities and take them seriously. And I think those are values we place a premium on here in Indiana, and that's what I try to bring to my job at the White House.